One more metabolic pathway, and then we'll stop talking about chemistry. I've saved the best for last, photosynthesis. First, let's look at some types of organisms. Autotroph, the name means self-feeding. In a sense, autotrophs are self-feeding because they are capable of making all the organic molecules their bodies require from inorganic sources. Plants are the autotrophs that you're most familiar with, but there are other kinds. More specifically, plants are photosynthetic autotrophs. They use sunlight energy to power their synthesis reactions. There are also chemosynthetic autotrophs. They use some exergonic reaction to power their synthesis reactions. Animals, fungi, and some bacteria, also some protistans, are heterotrophs. They have to feed on other living organisms, or the products from other organisms. In other words, they cannot synthesize all the organic molecules their bodies need. Examples of organic molecules that must be present in your diet include essential amino acids, fatty acids, and vitamins. Photosynthetic autotrophs need sunlight energy. They absorb that energy using pigments such as chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is the most important, but not the only pigment used by plants to absorb light energy. As shown in the figure on the left, light is a small part of the electromagnetic spectrum. Visible light is composed of several different colors. Each color has its own wavelength. For example, blue light has a shorter wavelength than red light. The shorter wavelengths have higher energy levels than the longer wavelengths. The figure on the right shows the visible spectrum ranging from violet to red. This visible light also corresponds fairly closely to the spectrum used by plants to power photosynthesis. Remember, in eukaryotic cells, photosynthesis occurs in the chloroplasts. Also remember that chloroplasts have stacks of inner membranes called grana. Grana are important because chlorophyll and the other pigments are found on these membranes. They are the site of the first half of photosynthesis, called the light or light-dependent reactions. It's here that sunlight energy is captured and stored in the nucleotides ATP and NADPH. Surrounding the grana is a clear liquid called the stroma. It's in the stroma that the second half of photosynthesis occurs. These reactions are called the Calvin cycle, or sometimes the light-independent reactions of photosynthesis. It's during these reactions that carbon dioxide is used to make glucose. In this picture, only the grana should be colored green. The rest of the chloroplast should be clear. Photosynthesis is a complex series of chemical reactions. In other words, it's a metabolic pathway, not a single reaction. The equation here summarizes photosynthesis. Carbon dioxide and water are reactants. Sunlight energy is required. Organic molecules, for example glucose, and oxygen gas are produced. So is this exergonic or endergonic? It's endergonic because light energy is required, and glucose contains more energy than the reactants, carbon dioxide and water. The first part of photosynthesis is the light reactions. As the name implies, these reactions require sunlight energy. Very short term, that sunlight energy is stored in the nucleotides ATP and NADPH. NADPH serves a similar purpose to NADH that we saw in cellular respiration. The reactions of photosynthesis require electrons. These electrons are supplied by water. Finally, oxygen gas is released during photosynthesis. It's produced during these light reactions. On the grana are clusters of pigment molecules called photosystems. These photosystems are composed of a central chlorophyll molecule called a reaction center and surrounding antenna pigments. These antenna pigments first absorb the light energy. This energy is passed from pigment to pigment until it's at just the right level that it can be absorbed by the reaction center. This transfer of energy involves exciting the outermost electrons. When photosystem 1's reaction center absorbs the light energy, instead of just exciting an electron, the reaction center releases an electron. My upward pointing orange arrow is indicating that this is a high energy electron that's leaving the reaction center. The sunlight energy that was absorbed is now carried by this electron. This high energy electron is now used to reduce NADP, making NADPH. Before photosystem 1 can do this again, it has to replace that electron. This replacement electron comes from photosystem 2. Like photosystem 1, photosystem 2's antenna pigments absorb sunlight energy. This energy is passed to the reaction center, which then loses a high energy electron. The high energy electron from photosystem 2 is given to an electron transport system, much like the one we saw in aerobic respiration. As in aerobic respiration, the energy carried by this electron is used to make ATP. The electron leaves the electron transport system and is given to photosystem 1's reaction center. The electron transport chain used during the light reactions of photosynthesis is not identical to that in the mitochondria, but it operates similarly. Hydrogen ions are pumped across the thylakoid membranes of the grana. ATP synthase uses that hydrogen ion gradient to make ATP. Notice how the blue molecules making up the electron transport chain link the two photosystems. Here the hydrogen ions accumulate inside the grana and then exit through ATP synthase, and ATP is generated. For photosystem 2 to continue supplying electrons to photosystem 1 and to generate more ATP, it requires replacement electrons. These electrons come from water. In a reaction called photolysis, sunlight energy is used to split water molecules into oxygen gas, hydrogen ions, and electrons. What the plant must have from this reaction is the electrons. The oxygen gas is released. Here's your textbook summarization of the light reactions of photosynthesis. One thing that it emphasizes is that the ATP and NADPH are next going to the light-independent reactions of photosynthesis. These reactions are also called the Calvin cycle. The Calvin cycle requires electrons and energy. The electrons and some of the energy is supplied by NADPH. Additional energy is provided by ATP. Carbon dioxide is used during the Calvin cycle. It's used to make glucose or other organic molecules. The first reaction of the Calvin cycle is called carbon fixation. It involves inorganic carbon in the form of carbon dioxide, which is incorporated into an organic molecule. The carbon dioxide reacts with a 5-carbon sugar called RUBP. 2 molecules of 3PG are produced. 3PG contains 3 carbon atoms. The 3PG is not a very reactive molecule. It is reduced using the energy and electrons supplied by ATP and NADPH from the light reactions of photosynthesis. The much more reactive molecule G3P is produced. This is the same molecule that was an intermediate in glycolysis. The G3P is used for 2 different things. Some of the G3P is used to make glucose. The remainder of the G3P is used to regenerate RUBP, completing the cycle. This diagram is from your textbook. The drawing in the upper left corner emphasizes how the light reactions and the Calvin cycle are linked. Let's take a break here. In the second screencast, we'll look at some alternate forms of photosynthesis.